back, everybody, to the 253 All Day, Everyday podcast. My name is Chris, and thank you so much for hanging on and rolling with me through 26 episodes. I really do greatly appreciate it. This week, we're going to kind of, what I would call, take a sharp, hard left-hand turn here and try something new. Going through 25 episodes, realizing that, Tacoma, yes, has a lot of good food places, a lot of good spots to hang out at, but we also have a really deep history here in the city. And I personally am a horror geek-ish thing. I like the dark. I like scary things. I like to be scared. I like to adventure into what people would call the darkness, and see how dark people can get. So I've gotten inspired the last couple weeks because I've been really not digging deeper, but I found this very interesting horror podcast talking about American serial killers, and they go just more into an in-depth look of these killers out there and what made them do what they did, and how they thought, even if it was really messed up, and if it was maybe nonsensical, or maybe it did make sense. Who really knows? But I got really inspired by it and made me want to dig deep into Tacoma's crime history. Has Tacoma ever really had any serial killers? I know Washington State has the Green River Killer, Ted Bundy, it's not really a serial killer, but a major crime. The dude that stole the plane and jumped off, WB DeBoris or something like that. I don't remember him, but I'll have to look him back up. But Washington State, just in general, has been a place where sometimes the oddballs come to. The people that think outside the box. Sometimes maybe not the most people that are there see the world in the same place. So we've always had a rich history of welcoming the people that take different or take a different path in life, good or bad. Washington State definitely has been a hub of that. So when I was getting very interested in the horror scene here in Tacoma, I dug into one of the first ones. The first things that popped in mind was like, has Tacoma really had any quote unquote serial killers happen here in Tacoma before? Because I really haven't heard any. So this is where I got led to the story of a gentleman, not born and raised into Tacoma, but the grotesque nature of his murder brought it up to headlines, and because of the time period, was made to look more irrehensible, made it look more mean or animalistic than it should have been. When you really look at the facts of everything and what was kind of going on, you get why someone could be led down this path due to the time. So we're going to set up the time period. It is between 1935 and 1945 here in Tacoma, Washington. A gentleman of the name of Jake Bird comes rolling through town as a transient on the railways, just like many people back in the day did. Especially after the Great Depression, jobs were hard to find. The railroads were something that people could just jump onto and hopefully find another place or find a better life in a different town where maybe everybody didn't know where they were. So, just like a lot of people during this time, a gentleman named Jake Bird decided to hop on the railroad and ended up his way here in Tacoma, Washington. To set off the time period, it is October 30th, 1949. So it's around Halloween. It's right before the day before Halloween. And if you know anything here about up here in Washington, the days get shorter, they get darker, they get creepier, they get more quote unquote menacing feeling. So it is a perfect time that a lot of people stay indoors, a lot of weird stuff can happen, and that is the kind of the time period. Jake Bird was a gentleman just down on his luck. He has been traveling through city, ended himself up here in Tacoma, and was having a very, very hard time trying to find a job or anybody that was willing to even give him work. So each day was a huge struggle for him. He had to live by the seat of his pants, sleeping in random places, sometimes not the best. Also, due to the cultural times of it being a very racist America during the time, and him being a African American during those times too, he really did not get benefit of the doubt, which you will hear more during when I found something very interesting during his court hearing. He says a very interesting self-aware thing of himself during the trial that you go, huh, maybe because he knew that he was an African American, he wasn't going to get a fair chance, so he just did what he had to do to survive, type of a situation, which makes you put you in a different headspace, just a way different headspace. So, setting up the time period, October 30th, 1949, the day before Halloween. It's a late night in Tacoma, Washington. It's probably it's rainy, it's gray. It's getting dark by 5:30, 5 o'clock. Everybody's trying to stay indoors, and Jake Bird is trying to find his next meal, man, to be honest with you. And he is wandering around there in Pierce County in Tacoma, and happens to find a house. Breaks into the house of Bertha Clutt and her daughter Beverly June Clutt. The gentleman comes into the house around midnight, 2:30. Reports differ. He breaks into the house. He picks up a axe, which is quote unquote part of his MO. Once you find out later when they do capture him, the same night. But when he gets to start talking, you realize that this wasn't his first rodeo type of a situation, and he realized that he had to. This might have been the only few ways that he could got what he needed to get to feed himself, type of a situation, especially during those times. The 1940s were not a forgiving time period, let's just say that. He enters the residence late at night, around midnight or 2:30, like I was saying earlier. While walking into the house, he goes into the shed, he picks up an axe, and he does say earlier there was no intention to murder anybody in this situation. He just said he needed to pick up the axe just in case stuff got hairy. He could do what he needed to do to survive. He enters the house. He finds Bertha's purse on the table. He goes through the purse. First and foremost, he takes off his shoes, which I find very, very interesting. He takes his shoes off in the house. So there's still a type of some respect there. He definitely wasn't completely out of his mind. He knew what he was kind of doing. He just needed to get in and get out, type of a situation. He goes into the house. He finds the purse. He takes $1.50 out. And by the time he takes the $1.50 out, he turns around and sees Mary June, Bertha's daughter, standing right behind him. He immediately turns around and attacks the woman. Through the same time, mother wakes up. There's a huge struggle in the house. Neighbors hear screams. They call the police. He happens up to murder both of these women with the axe. And when the police decide to show up, he runs out the back door because he's just finishing up the murder, unfortunately, and he books it out the back door. 3 police officers chase him. He puts up a fight. One police officer gives him a solid left hook to the face and knocks him out, and they arrest Mr. Bird there on the scene of October 31st now, early in the morning, around 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning. Jake Bird was a little bit of a history of Jake Bird. He was 45 years old. He was a transient gentleman. He was born and raised in Louisiana, but being an African-American gentleman in the South, life was hard for him. So at a very young of the age, he had to not really jump on to the train, but he felt the train life was going to be the only life for him, type of a situation. So he traveled throughout the country until he ended up in Tacoma. Only throwing that here into this story right now because when you go back into the trial, when I get a little bit more into the trial of this, which will be here soon, you'll see that this wasn't his first rodeo type of a situation. But like I said earlier, if you dig deeper into the 1940s and the 1950s, and anytime after the Great Depression, times were different. Times were a lot more violent. People were a lot more got what they need. They took what they needed because people weren't nice back then. It's just that simple. America was a tough place back then. Very, very tough. So when everything is said and done at the end of the day, Mr. Jake Bird is sitting in a Pierce County cell waiting for trial. Trial day comes. His lawyers basically just throw him under the bus. Don't really give him much of a defendant. They don't really defend him. And this is a very interesting thing, kind of tells you the time period and the mindset of it. Mr. Bird literally said in his final statement right before the judge basically sentenced him to death, he said, "I don't believe I ever had a fair trial. I watched my own lawyers tell the judge to put me up onto the gallows." So I feel like he knew from the start that he was never, ever, ever, ever going to get a fair shake in this world. Which, when you feel like you don't get a fair shake, you kind of do what you want to do. And you kind of hear more where he realizes that when he comes up to the days that he is going to be executed, he let the rest of the sheriff's department and the legal system here in Washington that this wasn't his first rodeo of murdering people with an axe. And he let them know that during his times on the train station, or during the train times, that he did murder a bunch of more people. And Tacoma PD then extended, not Tacoma PD, but the Washington State Department Justice System extended his execution date longer and longer because he continued to keep confessing and telling different aspects of the case that linked him to other cases. This is kind of a red flag to me just due to the times that I wonder if he was just trying to extend his time on this earth and just confess to a bunch of stuff. Just due to him being an African American, I know they got pinned with a lot of different things back then, and he might have just confessed to a lot of this stuff just to continue so he could stay alive just a little bit longer and just live his life out, maybe tell people where he's at. I don't really know. I'm not saying this is a good story or a bad story type of a situation, but it's a very interesting thing that he already knew that he wasn't getting a fair trial. And then when it came closer and closer, he confessed to up to 44 different murders, but only 11 of them that they could quote unquote pin to him. So it's kind of a crappy situation, but that's the time period and the stuff that we had. And I found it a very interesting story on Mr. Jake Bird. I definitely want to keep this podcast kind of close. It's a very interesting story. He was hung on Thursday night, July 14th, 1949 in Walla Walla, Washington. So he got to extend it a little bit more, but relatively, that is a very short turnaround time from October 1947, which I think I might have said 1949 earlier. Whoops. Oh no, 1947 to July 1949 where he got hung, and they were already going to try to execute him in 48. So he got to extend his life another year longer by confessing to these murderers, and he was officially marked as the Tacoma Axe Man after committing all these crimes, his first major big crime here in Tacoma. But I wonder if I dug deeper into this, that I would wonder if I would see that maybe he confessed to more than what he really did, just due to the time and stuff like that during the time. Just a real random, interesting story that I did find here in Tacoma. I'll be sprinkling more of these type of stories when I find them more interesting ones. Hopefully true crime and horror. I know Tacoma's got a pretty good ghost story scene and like ghost stories and like old abandoned buildings and stuff like that. So I'll be doing a lot more of this. This one was hopefully this one was interesting enough that you guys will go research it more and more. I will put some of the links that I did, some of the links that I fell upon onto, so you could read more into depth in the story. But the Tacoma Axe Man murder is a very good, interesting story, but it gives a lot insight of the cultural times here in Tacoma during the late 40s and the early 50s. Thank you so much for listening. This is the 253 All Day Everyday podcast. My name is Chris, and peace.